By now Metropolitan Savvas of Pittsburgh. At that time, he was a bishop at the Archdiocese. And Father Sean served in parishes in the Archdiocesan District in the Metropolis of Chicago. And for 5 years, Father Sean has, I think it was 5 years, correct? 3 years, I'm sorry, 3 years. He served under Metropolitan Nikitas in Hong Kong. Metropolitan Nikitas was born and raised here in the United States, and he was elected as the Metropolitan of Hong Kong. And it must have been about around 2097, 98, something like that. And shortly thereafter, Father Sean went out to Hong Kong and served with Metropolitan Nikitas there. Father Sean married his wife, Presvytera Pamela, who's also native from Hong Kong. And they have one son, Savvas. Do you speak so many languages now?
Two, he's learning a little bit of it.
Chinese and English, right?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So we're very, very blessed to have Father Sean talk to us about his time in Hong Kong with Metropolitan Nikitas doing that missionary work. Thank you, Father Sean, for coming.
Thank you, Father Nick. Everybody hear me okay? All right, how you doing tonight? Everybody's okay? Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you, Father Nick, always for your hospitality. Father Nick gave my background a bit. As he said, my wife is Chinese. She was born and raised in Hong Kong. She moved to the U.S. in the early to mid-90s, so she and her sister could go to college in America, and their family moved all the way to the Boston area, and we met shortly after. I didn't meet her in Hong Kong. So that kind of is the beginning of the background of why I ended up going to Hong Kong to serve anyway. I'd already been in a church serving in New York for 3 years. At that point, she had been working for a financial company, and they were opening a division over right in Hong Kong. And to her, it was very important for her to be able to say, you know what, I worked as a grown-up where I grew up as a kid. And that was a big deal for her to be able to do that. Fortunately, I had already known Metropolitan Nikitas for a little while. I'd been to Hong Kong to visit family and all that stuff over there, so I visited them before, and he knew me a bit. So I called and said, Herman, do you still need help out here for anything? Is there anything I could do in case my wife asked if we could move out here? And he said, absolutely. So what happens in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese is about 2,000 sheets of paperwork goes back and forth between our Archdiocese and the Metropolis of Hong Kong, asking for permission to let me go over there. I got permission from our Archbishop Demetrios to go serve there on loan, as they call it. They call it on loan because they're not having me officially be part of the Metropolis of Hong Kong. I'm just borrowed. I guess you used to do that with cattle in the old days, right? Anyway, so I went over there for 3 years, and that's kind of the background of how that all started. So why we went in the first place. A lot of people, a lot of clergy, they're established here in the U.S., and that mission idea wouldn't really come to them. We all have thoughts and fantasies about wouldn't it be nice to be able to go do mission work somewhere, but the opportunity doesn't arrive. But this was actually quite a set of circumstances that we couldn't pass up. Okay? So once I received permission, then I went there, and I will tell you what we used to do out there. I won't speak tonight about what they've been doing since Metropolitan Nikitas left. I'm only familiar with what happened during my time with him there. He has since been reassigned. He's now the president of the Patriarch Athenagoras Orthodox Institute, which is part of Berkeley University out in California. And they've got a new metropolitan in Hong Kong now, but I won't speak to anything that they do there. So, again, that was the beginning, the background of all this. And while I speak, if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, okay? I don't like to sit there and blab at everybody. I like to have some kind of interaction, because people do have a lot of questions. Which is why, when Father Nick called and said, oh, do you have anything you'd like to talk about? I said, yeah, I think I have an idea. I'd like to talk about this tonight, because every time people find out about my background, they say, yeah, New York, yeah, Metropolis of Chicago, Hong Kong, and everybody stops. Hong Kong, there's Greeks out there? I said, well, yeah, there are some. But the community out there is filled with all kinds of Orthodox people that you wouldn't even imagine. It was made up of Russians, Serbians, we had Romanians, Greek Australians, a couple people actually from Greece, a couple Greek Americans. We had Chinese Orthodox, people from India who were Orthodox, people from Ethiopia who were Orthodox. One guy from the country of Georgia, not Atlanta, down south Georgia, he was there as well. So it was quite a mix of people in that community. And we really did stay away from the Greek part of it. You know, we did the best we could to kind of be inclusive of all the Orthodox who were there. I'll get into that in a bit. So, as you can imagine, that metropolis is very different than, for example, the metropolis of Detroit. It's not as well established, shall we say. It's not going to be like the metropolis of Chicago, where the parishes have been there for a long time. Everybody knows who's in charge and what's going on. The situation we had then in Hong Kong was one metropolitan in charge of over 20 countries in Asia. Over 20 nations, not 20 cities, not 3 states, or 4 or 5 states, 20 countries. And yes, he had to travel quite extensively throughout Asia during his time there. And that proved to be draining, as you can imagine. The first pictures of the Metropolitan, I love him, he's a dear friend of ours. When he first showed up, when he first got there to Hong Kong, his hair was dark and his beard was dark, and after a couple of years of traveling around, the gray started to come in and stuff, and you could tell that it really does a number on the jet lag and all that. But what happens out there, again, it's different than the setup that you'd have here in the U.S. Out there, it's very much a poor metropolis. There's no money at all, except for what the metropolitan was able to raise. That was how everything was funded. He was very, very, very good at not fundraising, but being responsible with what people would donate. There was never a question, ever a question of, hey, I sent $100, where's that going? You would receipt it, and you knew exactly where that was going to be, no matter if you gave $1, 50 cents, or $1,000. So that's where all the money that we got came from. People misunderstand, unfortunately, and think that the Patriarchate in Constantinople sends checks every month. It's not like that. They don't have any money either, unfortunately. That's the situation. It's not Rome, where the Vatican can fund different things. We don't have that luxury, unfortunately. So everything that was done was really through him and his efforts. And there were parishes spread, not throughout all the over 20 countries that I spoke about. There were parishes set up in quite a few different places. For example, the Philippines, there were a bunch. India, Indonesia, one in Hong Kong, one in Singapore, Taiwan, and spread throughout. Now keep in mind, when we're talking about Asia, it was basically Southeast Asia. For example, Korea already has a Korean Orthodox Church, so that we didn't have a presence there, even though they are under our patriarchate, okay, the ecumenical patriarchate. Japan has a Japanese Orthodox Church, so we didn't really have anything to do with that except for traveling for trips and various things, just for vacation or whatever. People would go. I didn't get to go yet, maybe next year, but we'll go back to Hong Kong to visit if Metropolitan Nicholas doesn't go on vacation. So Japan was in charge of its own thing. We didn't have to worry about Japan. The countries we had under our ours, like I was in charge of anything, but under the metropolis of Hong Kong were poorer countries. There were countries under his watch where there were little Orthodox groups that really didn't have a church established yet. For example, Thailand. There was a small Orthodox community, but they couldn't really have any kind of services. They didn't have a church. So occasionally, one of the clergy would go over there and maybe do a service in a building or something like that. Same thing with Vietnam. We started to notice towards the end of his tenure, in my time there, that Vietnam was becoming more open to business. So you'd start seeing a lot of people kind of bypassing the difficulties you might find in China and going straight to Vietnam instead to do business. China was an interesting situation, an interesting part of the metropolis, because Orthodoxy is illegal in China, mainland China. Hong Kong, although it was given back, the British gave Hong Kong back to China, it's still able to kind of govern itself in a sense. So in Hong Kong, you can have everything you want there. That's no problem, religious-wise or pretty much whatever. But mainland China was different. So you're not able to do anything as far as the church goes. Now, a little brief bit of history. There was a thriving Chinese Orthodox Church a long time ago. During the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, a lot of those Orthodox were killed, as it was a very big anti-Western revolt amongst some of the local people. A lot of our Orthodox were killed, churches were destroyed, and then they built up again, adding thousands of people to the Chinese Orthodox Church, and then what happened? Communism. And then that destroyed some of the churches. Some of them do still stand, but one of them I think is being used as a restaurant. A couple of them are being used as storage, warehouses, but they are still there. But there was a Chinese Orthodox Church that had its origins from the Russian immigrants who came into Russia after one of the border disputes. They had a little battle up there. Some of the Russians stayed behind, and then they decided that, we'd like to stay here. And they had their little church set up, and then some of the locals became interested. As many of you know, I'm sure, we as Orthodox don't push ourselves onto anybody. And this was the case in China. The locals became interested and said, what is this Russian church thing? What is this? They went in, the priest said, all right, well, I guess we're going to have to try to translate this into the local language so these people could follow and understand, and they did, and people began to convert. We don't go out harassing people. We didn't do that in Asia, we don't do that anywhere. You're not going to see Orthodox, two of us walking around, bothering you in the street, knocking on your doors, sticking things in your mailbox. We're not, well, except for festival time, maybe, but aside from that, we don't do that. And, but over there, unfortunately, in mainland China, Orthodoxy, like I said, is still illegal. What I did, I was able to travel in and out of there, but, if they knew that I was a priest, then I wouldn't have gotten a visa to go in. So you have to be careful about how you're going to do things like that, traveling in and out. There was a Russian Orthodox priest living in Hong Kong, and my understanding is he has business cards made up that he has some kind of office, company or something, and that's what he uses to get in and out of China. But that's a whole other story. If they knew he was a priest, I'm sure they must have some idea by now that would cause a problem. People have tried to bring Bibles in there; they get confiscated. It's a difficult place, really, and especially considering that the Orthodox did have such a presence in history there. It's kind of funny that they don't, recognize us, but they do recognize some Protestant groups. Buddhism, Taoism, they will recognize their Roman Catholic Church, which is kind of state-approved. There's always an issue with the Vatican and mainland China about this, because there's a dispute about how can the government of China decide who gets to be the bishops over there and not the Vatican. So there's always these issues going on, but hopefully they will be resolved. I saw a picture in the news of Vladimir Putin hanging around with the Chinese premier the other day, so maybe, who knows, maybe they'll work something out. As I know, President Putin is Orthodox, so maybe he'll pull some strings or something. I don't know what they're going to do, but at this point, don't go in there. Don't talk about being Orthodox at the border. If you're ever planning to go to mainland China, just tell them your job. Don't say anything. You're not Christian. Don't say anything about it, or they won't let you in. Now, the work that went on in the Metropolis was quite varied. It was a lot different than the work that priests do here in the U.S. Now, what do we do here in the U.S.? Some of you may ask, well, you only work on Sundays, right? That's the story. Everybody thinks, well, you only work on Sundays. And my family even, back in Boston, I come walking back in after liturgy on Sunday. They called me 3 times. I'm going, do you not know by now? I've been a priest 10 years. You're still calling me on Sunday morning? I mean, hello, but it's different than what we do here. Here, we've got a lot of responsibilities. I know Father Nick can tell you we have meetings every 5 minutes. We're running to hospitals. We're doing different committees and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of times, I'll say it. It's on camera, so if I get in trouble, I'm in trouble for something anyway, usually. So a lot of times we're office managers. I mean, let's face it. We're not trained for that, but we kind of get put in that situation. We have to raise funds, do all this kind of stuff too. And not so much time doing services anymore, like in the old days perhaps, or in Greece, where they don't have committees and things like that like we do here. But over there in Hong Kong, it was very different, because our focus was, what are we going to do to help these underprivileged people? What are we going to do to try to help so that our priests in Indonesia don't get murdered by Muslim mobs? What are we going to do about these people in this village in the Philippines that have been drinking water from a little pond where animals go to the bathroom in. What are we going to do about this stuff? That's the things that we would spend our time with over there, not, arguing about what color the Sunday school room is going to be, none of that stuff. We spent our time doing things like that. Of course, every once in a while, we would also tend to, it's not stealing exactly, but we would encourage people, if you go to a hotel and they have all those free toothbrushes and soaps and stuff, not free, but for your room, if you grab them and put them in a bag and bring them to us so we can distribute them to the poor, why not, right? That's what they're there for. And the hotels, I found out, like that. Because they've got their name on everything, even on the soap, they have their name engraved on it, so it's good publicity for them too. They didn't mind. One guy, I told this story at my parish, came in with this huge trash bag full of this stuff. And I said, I don't know where you got it, how you got all this on this last trip. I said, but thank you for bringing it. The people will appreciate it. But anyway, we did a lot of work with the underprivileged. One of the groups that we worked with, that I was sent by His Eminence to work with, was an organization that helps domestic workers in Hong Kong. And there are a lot of them. Most of them are women who come from the Philippines or Indonesia. And they have to leave their families while their husbands stay home and watch TV, because they don't do anything. And then the women come to Hong Kong and work for not much money, and they stay in the people's homes, and they're basically nannies and cleaners and housekeepers and stuff like that. And that's common over there. It's not like some kind of, cruel situation. They come over and they're paid not, too bad for that kind of a job, I suppose. And that money goes back to help their families with money's needed. Because a lot of them aren't skilled. I've met a few of them who have advanced degrees, but there's no work in the Philippines. So they end up coming to Hong Kong and to do this kind of work instead. And this organization that I work with helped some of these women who were abused by their employers. There was one specific example I remember of a pretty cruel family who decided they didn't like the way that their Filipina helper made soup. So they took the boiling soup and dumped it on her. And she was in the hospital and burnt, and she had no place to go. And the government doesn't really, they will arrest you if you abuse some of these poor women, but it's not like the U.S. where they really get the, what they say, throw the book at you. They don't really do that so much. It's almost understood that sometimes they may be raped, mistreated. So we did a lot of work with them, trying to help them, have a place to go. Another project that we did that I helped a little bit, not much. Obviously I didn't do any of the translations or any of that stuff, the initial groundwork in Thailand. But after the tsunami, you all remember that in the mid-90s? So many hundreds of thousands of people died, and a lot of women lost work, they had no place to go, nothing to do. So what happened? They end up, some of them unfortunately, falling into prostitution and various things. They didn't know where to turn. So the Metropolis ended up being able to put together this directory in the Thai language of organizations that are there, but these women wouldn't have known to go to. And that way they could have this kind of book with them. It's almost like a yellow pages for help for different situations. And I know that was a help to people there. But our time there was more or less spent doing things like that. Now, I had some responsibilities as well as being the parish priest in the church there in Hong Kong. Let me talk about that for a second. Many people think, as rightly so, like we would in the U.S., a parish would be like this. But in Hong Kong, to build something like this, you would need billions of dollars, U.S. There's no room. You're talking about an area that's about 6 miles across with about 7 million people in there. So everything's tall. So what we had was an office building, and our church was on the 7th floor of the office building. And we had half of it office, and then there was a wall. And you could come around and go through the doors, and then the church was in there. And it was very small. But it fit maybe, I don't know, 50, 60 people, maybe, something like that. I'm trying to remember how many chairs I used to have to set up every Friday for Sunday. Yeah, maybe something like that. It was very small, but that's how you function there. That's the only way you can function. So my job was to be the parish priest there. We did the same kind of stuff we do here. I made a monthly bulletin and different things like that. I made a weekly thing and, you know, those type of things that we usually would do here. But I also started to realize that we had some of these refugees coming in. And that's another organization we worked with. It was a group that would help refugees. Because Hong Kong is one of those nations where you can come in being sort of a political refugee or somebody who had to flee their own country for whatever reason. You can go into Hong Kong with no questions asked and stay and apply for asylum. Other countries you can't even get in to do that, but Hong Kong, at this point anyway, they still allow that. So we worked with a lot of these refugees, and many of them, not many, but a group of them were our parishioners, people from Ethiopia who had their lives threatened. That guy I talked to you about that was from Georgia, there was some kind of political problem, and he was looking at probably execution or arrest at the least. So he was able to get out of there one night late. You know, different people like that who were there. But the problem is, when they would have to go work with the UN to try to get reassigned someplace and have a new life to start over, many of them couldn't really communicate. It's not like these people come in with money, they can go get, you know, lawyers and all this other stuff to help them. So what I started to do was give some of them very preliminary English lessons. And I would, you know, teach them, even though, you know, my Boston accent, but they, you know, they didn't mind that. But I'd give them some basic English lessons. And, you know, that was able to kind of help them understand and communicate a little bit better with those agencies. So that was kind of a neat thing that I got a chance to do. Anyway, back to our makeup of our church. We have, as I said, all these different nationalities. People a lot of times wonder, well, what did you do for service? Like, how did you do it? Well, primarily everything would have been in English. Everything was in English, except we would do the creed every week. We would do that in English, and then we'd do it in Chinese, Cantonese dialect. That's what they speak in Hong Kong, not Mandarin. We would do it in Cantonese. The Lord's Prayer would first be English, then Greek, and then Cantonese. And then all the people from whatever country they were from would stand up, not so much in order, but everybody would take a turn and say it in their own language. So sometimes we could hear it in, 10 different languages on a Sunday. It was really spectacular. It was very nice to be able to hear that. And His Eminence would read the Gospel in Greek, I would do it in English, and that was it. But the rest of the services were usually done in English, unless there were certain hymns. Because I think most of you know, some hymns sound funny if you try to turn them into English, they don't sound right. So we would do certain, periodically some things we would do. And one night, we were doing our Easter service, the late night Pascha service, and we're standing, the resurrection service, and we're standing there at the altar. And I was always at the side, so I was probably facing like this. His Eminence goes, taps on me. I said, yes. He said, can you do Christos Anesti in English? And I'm like, I never did it before. Because in New York, we never did it in English. And he's like, can you make it up? I'm like, okay. And then, we were trying to do it in English because we had a lot of local people who said, let's go watch what the Orthodox are doing. And they'd all want to come in and see us for our service. Now, Easter was a funny situation because our place was so small we couldn't fit everybody. Because even over in Hong Kong, as we have here, there are people who live there and you see them at Christmas and Easter. So that's the same situation that we have here, of course. And so some of those people would show up, so we couldn't fit. And because our Easter almost never coincides with the Catholics and Protestants, many times we'd use one of their facilities for our Easter service. They were very good about that. We'd use the Anglican Cathedral, which is a historical landmark. It's an amazing, incredible building, but it has no air conditioning, so if it's hot over there. I'll tell you about that later. Other times the Catholics would have a facility we could use. It was very gracious of them. We had very good relationships with these other Christian organizations and denominations, And it was a great experience to be able to work with them while we were out there. One of my favorite stories, though, for our Pascha resurrection service that was also coincided with the due date of my son being born. And I remember standing, everybody loves this story, I was standing at the side of the altar, staring at my wife like this, who was going, whoa, sitting down in the pew. And, and I was going, And the bishop would tap, pay attention. Oh, okay. I'm trying to pay attention to the service, and I'm like, look and go there. We thought he was going to come out that night. He didn't. He gave us a few more days. But all the ladies in the parish would gather around behind my wife and go, she's okay. They'd be doing that at me. So I said, okay. The bishop's like, you pay attention. Stop fooling around. I said, yeah, but the baby might be coming out. Doesn't matter. Finish the service. I said, okay. Anyway, that was, but our Easter services were fantastic. But like I said, we had a lot of people who want to visit. And that was an interesting aspect of Hong Kong, okay? Because you're talking about a population of 7 to 8 million, and only 10% of that entire population is Christian. So it's not like the U.S., where there's a majority Christian population, and we're really tiny. We were extra tiny over there. The problem is the other ones weren't so big either. So we all worked very well together in order to make our presence feasible in that type of an environment. And His Eminence, to his credit, did an amazing job building up those relationships. I was very fortunate. We had Cardinal Zen first he was bishop, and then they made him cardinal at the Vatican, and he came for his enthronement in Hong Kong. And it was unbelievable. They had, in order of, I don't say importance, but prominence or whatever, they had the Catholic bishops, Metropolitan Nikitas, then me, and the Anglican bishops, and the Lutheran bishops, and everybody else. It was kind of neat being able to be there and see that experience. And it was really amazing to be there. And I can tell you, even over in Asia, the Catholics' big events run a lot smoother than ours do. So that's just a little side thing. I wish we could take some lessons from them on how to run some things sometimes. But there you are. So any questions so far? Anything that I can answer for you? Anything that might have popped up? No, not yet? Oh, yes. A number of the Orthodox? Oh, boy. I think on the mailing list, there were over 100 families, technically on that mailing list, but some of them, Hong Kong's a funny place because people come there for about 2 or 3 years for company business and then leave. And then as soon as they go, a new family shows up. So nobody's really there at the same time. But I'd say on the mailing list it was over 100, but each week I think we'd have maybe 40 to 50 parishioners maybe. Sometimes 30, it depends. So, during school time, like here, everybody vanishes and goes traveling. But there's not that many by any stretch of the imagination. It's very small. But the time I was there with Metropolitan Nikitas, it was highly respected. And it was, I also had a responsibility, which was fantastic, to be able to give Orthodox lessons and speeches to quite a few Protestant groups and Catholic groups. A lot of the seminarians would come in and I'd do presentations for them. I'd get sent to their schools to do presentations for them. And everybody had a really great relationship of working together. It's different than here. Like I couldn't even tell you the name of a Catholic priest across the street from my church. I have no idea who that is. And the Protestants, there's about 3,000 of them on the street all the way down, 5 mile, like past the church every block. I don't know who they are. But over there we did. And we had it was just a fantastic situation being able to work with everybody. We didn't have too much contact with any non-Christian groups, really. Buddhism is not really like a place you're a Buddhist. They'd have temples where people go in and light their incense and then leave on special days and stuff, but it wasn't like a community where there's a leader you could talk to and associate with. We didn't have that. The Muslims had this enormous mosque in the Kowloon side of Hong Kong. This huge facility. They were always standing around outside watching everybody go by. They had their own little place they keep to themselves. They didn't want to get involved in any of the charitable organizations. And there was some little fringe groups too. Of course, you had Mormons lurking about, as you do. But for the most part, it was mostly mainstream Christian denominations that we would have dealings with. Any other questions at this point? Yes?
So why is orthodoxy outlawed in China?
Well,
They have to make deals with the government?
Well, why is it, why it's outlawed in China? I think the problem is they can't control it. If the way they're looking at it, it's Greek country moving in, or Russians trying to come into our place and set up their own little nation within. I think that's how they're looking at it. So to them, well, we can't really control what you guys are doing as much. So until they figure out what this is, that's the problem. And it is a problem. You know, there are a lot of people who have to worship in secret, things like that. Many of them can go to the Russian consulate, where they do have a little chapel. So you can go in there, the Chinese can't touch it, you go in there. And they go in there and we'll have services periodically when the priest can get sent from Hong Kong. And there is a Russian Orthodox priest in Hong Kong. He's got even a tinier little church, which brings up a whole bunch of canon law issues that I don't even think we need to get into tonight, only to say that Asia, except, like I said, for Japan, is really under the ecumenical patriarchate of Constantinople. But you've got Moscow and the different patriarchates trying to come in, and they say, oh, we're here as tourists. Let's come in. We're a bunch of tourists. I know we're 5 priests, but we're all tourists dressed in all our stuff, and they try to set up their own little parish. We had one Russian priest who used to come into our office and try to figure out our membership list, because he'd like to try to go grab some people that were of Slavic background and bring them over to his place. It was kind of a little bit like a spy movie sometimes. It was kind of interesting to see that. But according to canon law, you can't really go into another Orthodox jurisdiction and set up your own place. You're not allowed to do that. That goes against how we were created. In America, it's kind of a funny spot. And English-speaking countries, really. Australia's got the same issue. England has the same issue. You've got the Greek Orthodox Church here, the Russian one there, then the Romanian one over here, then the Antiochian one there, and it's kind of a mess. But technically, they would need to get permission from our patriarch in order to be able to come in, and they don't do that. They just walk right in, set up their own things, announce, there's finally a church in Taiwan. Well, guess what? There's been an Orthodox church in Taiwan for about 15 years. This isn't a new thing. You guys just came in and tried to imitate what we already have. So it gets to be a little touchy. Our patriarch, unfortunately, as many of you know, is got a lot of other things to do. He's constantly under threats of being executed and all this other crazy stuff that goes on. He doesn't have time to be overseeing what they're doing. And unfortunately, my understanding is the new Metropolitan in Hong Kong doesn't do a whole lot to try to stop that. So it's a strange situation out there now, and it's been slowly getting worse over time. Any other questions? Yes? Did we get inter-Orthodox? Actually, it was only one time that we had an inter-Orthodox kind of gathering. And what happened was, this is another one of these issues, the Coptic, the Egyptian Orthodox, the Coptic Church, had maybe every 6 months, they sent a priest from Australia to do a service for the Coptic Christians in the area. There were a few. It was very small, it looked like somebody's living room. But it was a little chapel, and they invited us to the grand opening of their chapel. So everybody came in and for that. But I think the Russian priest was there. I was there. I'm trying to remember who came with me. But that was the only thing that I'm aware of. I don't know if anything's happened since, but that was pretty much it. Because for a long time, it was us there. It was Metropolitan Nikitas and whatever priest he may have had helping them at the time in Hong Kong directly. I can't speak for the other countries, but I'm pretty sure it's a similar situation, that there really isn't that much interaction, as far as I know, but I could be wrong. Yes?
In terms of catechism, was there catechism for the local populations, for the native Chinese or for the Indonesians or wherever?
Yep, Father Nick was asking, was there any kind of catechism for the people there? And there was. I would do an Orthodox class. Just general Orthodoxy stuff for locals who were interested. We put it in the newspaper, little flyers around in different places, and people would show up. We had a group. It was also always one lady that had a tinker hood, and she'd sit there like this the whole time. Why, you know, and I'd be talking, and I'd look at it and be like, kind of like I'm doing out the cameras, and I'd stop and kind of go for a second. But, yeah, so we did do that. But there were people who wanted to learn more. They didn't necessarily want to convert, but they wanted to know what we were. So it was different. They'd see pictures of His Eminence, you know, with his hat and the thing, and walking around, and they'd say, "Whoa, you know, what is this? Let's go investigate that." Then I'd teach them about what it all means and stuff. But we did do a bit of that. But to a lot of the locals, I mean, they had, as I said, being only 10% Christian, you had a lot of people who were settled in, being, you know, Taoism and things like that. Like I said, they'd go to their temple, the Chinese New Year, light a bunch of incense sticks, they'd kind of shake it for good fortune for the year, put it down, and then that was pretty much the extent of it. Then they'd have little local kind of traditions that tied in with that. But a lot of them didn't care, and they weren't offended by us by any means, but they weren't also interested in the same thing. You know what I'm trying to say? Now, a lot of people ask, what did we walk around like over there? Well, we didn't dress as clergy over there, I can tell you that. We'd looked like you know, it was a business guy. Would have, you know, kind of one of those button-up shirts with a collar with no tie and just dark pants. We just kind of walk around like that. His Eminence didn't want us dressing up as clergy and walking around the streets because it might freak people out. You know, we didn't know quite what the response would be by walking around like that. So we certainly didn't see anybody with these things on walking around. Not to mention, you know, this over in Hong Kong is the biggest, I think the biggest escalator. I think it's in the world still, and it goes up from one level all the way up. Because Hong Kong's built all around the harbor, but the more expensive places to live and businesses is you go up the side of the mountain. So that would be called the mid-level area. So you take from all the way down, this escalator, it goes all the way up, all the way up, all the way up, so you don't have to walk. And then in the morning, it goes down. So everybody who lives in the mid-levels can take the escalator and doesn't have to go down the stairs. They can go all the way down. And His Eminence told me one time he had his underneath on and he almost got caught in the escalator. He's like, I'm never doing that again. So that took care of that. But only for official things. For example, I was sent once to the Chinese University of Hong Kong opened their religious department, and it was quite a big deal. We had the cardinal there and the Anglican archbishop, and His Eminence was away on one of the trips he was supposed to go on, and he sent me in his place. So I went in, you know, I had my priest hat on. He gave me permission that day, because I'm not at that rank of priest to get to wear a big cross, but he goes, put the cross on. I had that on. I had one of the, you know, exodo thing with the big sleeves, and I went in and, you know, dressed up with everything on. And that was quite an experience. It was nice. Right when they opened it, it was a gong. We all got all the religious leaders, and me too, got to take the mallet up to the gong, you know, for the big opening. It was neat. It was a really cool experience to do that. But again, we didn't really dress. You wouldn't notice. I mean, you know, I'd walk around with t-shirt and jeans and stuff, and you know, you just don't really want to stand out. It's not a good idea in any place. Having, you know, I haven't traveled as much as probably some of you, but having traveled as much as I have, I do know that you don't want to really stand out in a foreign place. It's not the best idea, and certainly over there we didn't want to be noticed as much. You know, as difficult as that is being, you know, Westerners being over there, you don't want to stand out. Not that it's a dangerous place. Hong Kong is absolutely safe. Kids would go around by themselves. You know, you see little kids on the train, the subway, and everything, and they're fine. There's never any problem like that. I mean, compared to other places, it was like paradise. And people always ask, they say, do you miss it? Yeah, absolutely. I love it over there. I absolutely love living there. And having been there, and it wasn't even that long. It was a little less than 3 years. But it's funny that there's a professor that used to come out there once a year to give a seminar. Now, he was a professor of ethics, but he was also a MD, a doctor too. He had both. So I'm not exactly sure I think he did both jobs too. I don't know. He's something else. He's from Texas. He always came with these cowboy boots on. And he told me about this group of people that don't ever really fit in again. He said, Well, you've got people who are displaced and live in another culture. And a lot of times, they feel kind of out of place or whatever. But when they come back to where they came from, they don't ever really fit in there again either. It always seems like something's a little bit off. And I know exactly what that feels like, because even though I've been back here, after there I went to Minneapolis for 2 years, and I've been here in June it'll be 3 years, and you still don't feel quite right again. Like, it's funny. I don't know how to explain it, but you get so acclimated to being in a different culture, different lifestyle, that, I don't know, it changes your perspective, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, you turn on the news, you see poor people, but we have a young fellow with us. I don't want to say anything that'll scare him, but I've seen some things walking down the street that I never thought I'd ever be able to see. I don't wish anybody to have to look at some of the things I've had to see out there, and that's poverty and stuff, and it can be quite frightening and humbling at the same time. So it was an experience that caused me to grow. I know it changed my priesthood quite a bit, because when you first ordain, Father Nick would tell you, right, we think we're going to save everybody in the whole world, right? We go get ordained, rushing in there, then you realize, oh, maybe it's a little bit different than that. But the biggest thing, I think, as a priest for me, has always been, it's not when, oh good, we raised money for a new carpet, that kind of stuff. It's always the simple things. When people ask me, my family stuff, they go, is it worth it doing what you do? I say, yeah, I think so, because every once in a while, you don't realize the effect that you might have. Somebody will come up to you and say, oh, Father, thank you so much for last month. You read a prayer for my mother, and it helped her a lot, and it made her feel a lot better, and she's doing better now. And that kind of stuff, you say, oh, that's the stuff, am I right? That's the stuff that means a lot to us. And when you're doing things like we were doing in Hong Kong, where we are grabbing all those soaps and little shampoos and stuff and giving them to people that have nothing to clean themselves with, it opens your eyes to something else. That it's not all about parades and festivals and doing all these kind of things and Christmas parties and all this stuff. It's really about, what are you going to do for these people? I mean, are you going to sit back and just let people in need suffer? What are you going to do about it? We talk a lot about it. We read the Gospels from the pulpit all the time about doing this stuff, and everybody goes, yeah, good idea. All right, coffee hour. What's the donuts? And then everybody walks up. But does anybody really do anything? No, I'm not, by any means, or any stretch of the imagination, an advocate for government stealing your money and doing with it whatever they feel like, okay, which happens sometimes. I think it's up to us individually to do what we think is right, because we're the ones going to be accountable for it, not the federal or state governments taking our stuff and giving it away as they see fit. But I think that having done this experience, it's opened my eyes to see that there are a lot of people that are in a different situation than we are. And we're very blessed, even though I know the economy is bad now, and there's a lot of hard times, there are people who've got it way worse than we could ever even dream of. And just being there to be part of that experience and to live amongst other people, and even other Orthodox, to see how they do things. There are a lot of for example, we would do over in Hong Kong, because we keep, except for Easter, the new calendar. We have Christmas the same time as the Western churches and everything else. But over there, we had some Serbians and some Russians, so we would do things in the old calendar too. So we'd have 2 Christmas services, one a couple weeks later. And we'd do things for them. They had these other kind of little services where they'd bring stuff that looks like our Koliva. They'd bring it in for somebody's name day. It was just these different traditions that we learned. It was really neat, to see that. And I think that it expanded quite a bit for me. I can't speak for anybody else who's served doing these kind of experiences, but I would imagine they'd say similar things. But it was really a blessing getting to go out there, and I hope that, if anybody ever has an opportunity to visit Asia, if you would stop by one of the churches and visit and say hi, maybe, drop off $20, that goes far over there in some places, believe me. But that's that. So any other questions from anybody? No? All right, well, thank you for your time. I hope I didn't blab too long. And thank you very much, Father Nick, for this opportunity. I really appreciate being able to talk about that tonight. Thank you.
It's important for us to hear these things, to hear how the things are done in different places of the world, and to see the differences in which, the different ways in which people live, and to have that understanding for us. Sometimes it's important for us to see that we don't see it the same way that you see it, so we appreciate that very, very much. Father Sean will be available for a few more questions, if you don't mind, afterwards. We're going to go to the conference room. I think we have some light refreshments, some coffee, and maybe a few little things to munch on there. Father Sean, I have to introduce you to somebody, to somebody publicly. Natalie Chalice, one of our parishioners, long-time member here at church. Her parents were born in Russia, and they fled they fought and then fled during the Bolshevik Revolution. Her father walked all the way across Siberia and ended up in Shanghai.
Wow.
And that's where Natalie was born, Shanghai. And she remembers growing up in Shanghai. And I remember one of the things that was very touching to me is when Hung Yun read the Gospel in Chinese at the Agape service. She remembered hearing that from when she told me she remembered hearing the Chinese language when she was growing up, and remember these things from the time that she spent in Shanghai. So I just wanted to let you know that we had somebody who was a part of that second wave of Orthodox Christians in China at the time. Anyway, thank you very, very much for attending, and we'll meet you in the conference room, and you can ask Father Sean any other questions.
Thank you, everyone.
For just a few minutes, so then he can get home to his family.
Thank you very much.